I'm back. I beat 3 games in the past, month or whatever the fuck, and I'm here to break it down for you. It's another little grab bag. What did he play this week? I know you all were wondering. I know everybody was wondering. So here I am. The crowds can disperse. All right. First game is kind of like I reviewed another one on this channel. It's like a backrooms game. That one's called The Complex, I believe. And this is essentially the same thing, except it's underwater. It's fucking called Pools. All right. And I remember during Summer Games Fest, they were showing off a game that to me I thought was like, oh, this is Pools. But that was something else. So they're using the same aesthetic. Apparently there is a backrooms concept for like the hallways and shit, whatever, but it's like underwater, where it's just indoor pools that just go on forever. Apparently, I don't know who comes up with this shit. The internet's a weird place. All right, but this game is pretty creepy and off-putting and everything you'd expect from fucking being lost in the back rooms. But I feel like I just need a little bit more like story, like what's happening, who am I, where am I, what's going on, what's the goal, what's the objective, you know what I mean? And you're just this silent protagonist in first person stumbling around for like 3 hours. And I was passing the controller off with my friend because there's 6 levels, about 20 minutes, 30 minutes each, whatever, depending on how lost you get, right? And so we're passing it back and forth. At the end of every level, you like go deeper down into this fucking, like you like jump in a hole or whatever and just go deeper down in this fucking maze, right? And then when it ended, there's really no resolution. We just sort of looked at each other like, that's the end, I guess. In the complex, they at least had a little bit of context for what was happening. Just like a little 90-second scene of the characters are walking in together and they have these hazmat suits and they're documenting what's going on with the camera and shit like that, and their audio is being recorded and stuff. Like, they've sectioned off this entrance to the fucking back rooms that they discovered, and they're going in doing like some official investigation of it. And that's all it takes, just a tiny little intro. It's like, all right, that shit was creepy, it was tone setting, it established what's happening. And that game also had the added element of, it was also first person, but your character was holding a camera up to his face. Like, you could turn the flashlight on, you could zoom in and out and stuff like that. This one, you're just sort of just walking around like a video game. So it was pretty cool. It didn't really get too frustrating. There was only like one part, I don't want to call it a puzzle, but we couldn't really figure out what to do in this one particular section, and we had to turn the brightness up on the screen, and that sort of made it a little more obvious. But there's no enemies in this game. There's a couple times you turn the corner and you see something, or you think you see something, and we had a couple jump scares like that. But yeah, I mean, it was pretty forgettable, and I thought maybe we should have held out for the one that I thought was Pools at Summer Games Fest, because there's a part of that trailer where they escape this area, or they leave this area, and they're in this fucking suburban, it goes on as far as the eye can see over these fucking endless hills of just suburbia. Like, that looked creepy. So it's like, okay, the setting changes in that game. So I don't know, man. I feel like my best friend CJ loves these. It's funny because he's a PS5 fanboy. He's a Sony fanboy through and through. But when I look at his list of what he wants to play, it's all like Steam bullshit, like super indie. He must find it on TikTok. I don't know. No one's ever heard of it. You know what I mean? And we tried to install one the other day. We finally got to play and we booted it up. And it was so awkward and just like goofily made. Some fucking guy from Sweden living in his basement coding this game, and it was the most awkward dialogue I've ever heard in my life, trying to pretend they're from America or whatever with these crazy accents. That shit was goofy as hell. We deleted that like 5 minutes later. Plus it crashed the whole Steam Deck and everything. So we're able to play Pools, and it was better than that level, but I feel like on my friend's list is a whole lot of walking simulator type stuff that doesn't have a whole lot of narrative and stuff going on, so that they can be very hit or miss. But some of them are like really there on the aesthetic and the vibe and everything like that. That's what he's all about, is the vibe. So yeah, it was a pretty good time. We had a pretty good time. That's the type of thing where instead of watching a movie or something, you could just hand the sticks back and forth on the couch and play a game like that. So that's pretty fun. All right, next on the list, it's kind of weird that I would ever be interested in this game, but hear me out. So it's called The Making of Karateka, which is like a game from the fucking 80s or some shit like that. Hold on, let me actually look up exactly when this shit was from. Give me 1 second. So before I get into what Karateka is, the reason I was interested in this game is because it's the making of Karateka. So what that actually is, it's this new fucking genre of video games that I wanted to support. I was like, oh shit, that sounds awesome. Like the creativity there, that anyone could have this idea, like this should be a game. You know what I mean? The Making of Karateka. It's a like virtual guided tour type of fucking documentary basically. And it's this company, they have this idea of game preservation. They did Atari 50 recently, which is not just a collection of old games, because I've played collections of games before. I had the PlayStation Mini, right? And you plug it into your TV. It's a classic little PlayStation. It's a cool little display device, but you can actually plug it in and play like 30 games that are on there. And some of them are bullshit and some of them are pretty good, like Final Fantasy VII's on there and stuff like that. And there's some other good ones. I forget exactly what's on there, but my point is they weren't presented to you in any way. They were just like, dumped out in front of you, and you could just start messing with it, but you might be fucking confused like how to play it or anything. There's no context. You know what I mean? And that's what this company is. It's like a guided tour through Atari's history. So before you sit and play a game, it's giving you the context of like what other games fucking existed at the time when this came out, or this new mechanic that you probably think is so trivial and you've done it a million times, like this game fucking invented it or whatever. You know what I mean? And it just tells the story of it, which I think is important, like historically and stuff like that. But it's just way more interesting to me as a presentation of games. Before I play it, like tell me something about it. Why should I give a shit? You know what I mean? Why should I give a shit? And so I thought that was cool, The Making of Karateka. Now, I don't know, like I heard a lot of praise for it on the podcast and stuff. And I don't know if it's because these people are nostalgic for the game, because I could see that like rose-colored glasses and everything like that. I was ultimately a little disappointed with the package. You know what I mean? So for a little bit of backstory, this is a guy, his name's Jordan Mechner, and he went on to create the Prince of Persia series. So he was actually like a breakout success, really. And it tells the story of how he developed this Karateka game while he was putting himself through college and shit. And like he used like a rotoscope, like basically he took footage of like his dad and his karate coach and shit like that, like actually doing the moves and stuff. And then he like traced it into the game and converted it to pixels or what like that. So the movement was apparently much more fluid and lifelike than what other games were doing at the time by far. So apparently this shit really made people stop and take notice at the time. But I thought just as the story was kind of getting interesting, and like he would go on to make Prince of Persia and everything like that, which is obviously something I've actually heard of. I've never heard of Karateka. Then the game ends. It's like the end. You know what I mean? And so I think they could have done more, and they probably should have done more. I mean, it's called The Making of Karateka, so I guess you can't fault them. But I thought once the story was really getting good, or I was interested about where it would go next, and it just fucking ended. But to talk about some of the presentation of it left a lot to be desired. It really felt like you've seen a million documentaries where they're in like a room that's all like set up for the occasion. It looks like they rented like a hotel room or something like that, and they sit the guy down in a chair and the camera's looking right at him and the interviewer's off screen. It wasn't like that. It looked like they hired like a sixth grader with shaky hands, and they're in Jordan Mechner's kitchen at home, and he's sitting and talking to his dad right next to him with poor lighting and shit like that. Like the production value is nothing whatsoever. So it left a little to be desired. You know what I mean? Because like if y'all are confident in this new concept that you want to do, this more like documentary style fucking game, is like you gotta put a little, you gotta come up out the pockets a little bit more than that. You know what I mean? They paid this kid $11 for the afternoon. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know, man. But it was interesting because when they mentioned the game, like, oh, Jordan was submitting this game to tons of studios and they all rejected it or whatever. Like, you get to play that game. You know what I mean? And it talks about how, like, all right, he didn't like this element of the game and it wasn't successful, so he replaced it with this element of the game. And then you can play that version of the game and you're like, oh, I see why Jordan would have come to that conclusion or whatever. Or when he submits it to someone and most people just reject him or whatever, but this person gave some feedback. There's a whole letter and you can read the letter. It was like scanned into the fucking game. You read the letter and Jordan like applies the feedback to the next version of the game and you can play it. Like, oh shit, that is more fun. That was good advice. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is just interesting because normally you'd read on Wikipedia or whatever, like, oh, Jordan Mechner got a piece of advice and it turned the game around or whatever. That is just one sentence. This is like, oh shit, I could see the idea taking place and the inspiration taking place and how it paid off. Like, you could see it. It's like the show versus tell thing. You know, don't tell me, show me. It's pretty cool. I want to support this genre for sure. But it had a lot to be desired for me at the end of the day because I have no nostalgia for Karateka. You know what I'm saying? The game is pretty simple. Now, you have to understand that it was in the 80s, right? But you're basically just going from the left to the right, going further into this fucking castle or whatever. There's 3 levels. First level is like outside the castle, and you can see Mount Fuji in the background, and like it's scrolling with the view of the mountain in the background. Apparently that was mind-blowing at the time. People were like bleeding from the nose and stuff at the time just taking a look at it. You know what I'm saying? And I had to remind myself, like, all right, like, pretend it's fucking impressive. Nah, I had to keep that in mind. You know what I mean? And it does have like a simplicity to it and a kind of a beauty to it, for real. And then like the third level, the last level, you're just underground, so it's pretty much just no graphics on the screen at all, which is kind of funny. But they were able to suggest the change of setting and stuff so simply. The movement, like the punching and the kicking, you have a high, a low, and a medium and shit like that. And just he had to animate every kick in the game, the high kick, the low kick, and shit like that. And he had to program the AI to be responsive and stuff like that. Personally, I kind of cheesed the game because it's kind of hard. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of back in the day from like the arcade mentality where you're feeding it quarters or whatever. Like, it's pretty hard. You know what I mean? So I would kind of like back off in the middle of a fight if they were getting the upper hand. I started to learn that if I just keep them at arm's length and I just start fucking kicking them in the head, every time they approach, I just fucking kick them in the head. You know what I mean? They just come a little closer to me, kick them in the head. And I just wouldn't even let them get close. You know what I mean? It was kind of unfair. I was kind of cheesing the game a little bit, to be honest with you. So another big thing was the soundtrack of the game, because Jordan Mechner's father was a composer apparently, and he seemed like a cool guy because he really supported his son. You know what I'm saying? Especially back then. I think even like my life 30 years after this shit, my parents would have had a hard time like getting it if I wanted to make games. You know what I mean? But back then in the 80s, and his father supported him, like, good for him, man. And so his dad actually composed the soundtrack, which, you know, and it sounds like chiptune to us now, but back then that was blowing people away that it was even like the concept of having like a score, because it was like a narrative that they were telling. And so there's like a theme, like when the princess is on the screen, you have the princess theme, or when the villain is on screen, you have the villain theme and stuff like that. Like, that shit was blowing people's mind back then. So it was a pretty simple score to the game. Yeah, I was listening to the commentary about it, and a lot of thought went into it, and it was hard for them to program that shit and everything. You know what I mean? There was only like 150 sounds it was capable of making or some shit, and you had to turn that into music. I don't know, dude. I don't know. So it's pretty impressive. You know what I'm saying? So the version that I liked, I kind of just like messed around with the old school versions, because honestly they were laggy as fuck, and I thought it was my Steam Deck. Like at one point it's like, do I need to restart my Steam Deck because this shit is like chugging? But apparently that was just the response time of the emulated like Apple II version, you know what I mean, which is easy to believe. So I didn't really actually play the game, which I thought was kind of a cop-out. I'm like, I'm not really playing the game. There's this mode where you can just watch someone else play and you can take control at any point. And so I sort of just watched and like skip forward to the next section or whatever. So I got the experience, but I felt like I wasn't actually playing it. But then I was pleasantly surprised, because later into the game, they give you a playable version of a remake of the game. And Jordan Mechner wasn't involved, but this team like faithfully recreated the game to modern standards. But basically they were only doing things that Jordan would have been capable of doing at the time, like in 1984 or whatever. You know what I mean? So it was a very faithful adaptation, which is funny because Jordan Mechner, apparently in like 2011, he worked on like a 360 remake of the game, and it looked silly, dude. It looked ridiculous. So the fans actually made a much better remake. So that was playable. That was really responsive and everything like that. And it looked better, and the soundtrack sounded better and stuff like that. And it's cool because in this remake, they actually reintroduced things that Jordan wasn't able to put into the game. Like, he was going back and forth. You see the emails going back and forth between him and the company that bought his game. And they're suggesting things like at one point the villain was going to have like a pet tiger or something attack you, right? And it never made it into the game. So in the remaster, they found a way to put it in there. So I think that's pretty cool, man. Like, there's just a lot of reverence for this game, apparently. And I had never heard of it before this. But yeah, I wanted to check that out. And it's definitely interesting. And I wonder what's going to come of this format, if we're going to have more. Hopefully it'll get to like PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 era and shit, so I could have the nostalgia. But right now it seems like they're just doing arcade type stuff. But yeah, I'm here for it. I might even play the Atari one, because I never in my life had any interest in just a collection of random Atari games. But if it's telling a story, like if the greater context is video game history and stuff like that, and teach me something about it, or the experience at the time the developers are going through to fucking bend these computers to their will and shit like that, like that's impressive to me. That's impressive to me for sure. We've made it to game number 3. This is a spiritual successor created by the original makers of the game of the Castlevania series. It's called Bloodstained. All right. And it's still very faithful, like left to right, sort of like restricted movement, restricted combat and stuff like that. Like, they did it in the style and the technical limitations back then, but like it's got a facelift. You know what I mean? Like, it looks really good. It's not just like 2D, it's like 2.5D basically. But they actually do some cool stuff where there's times like on the approach to the castle, it's not just the left to right scrolling, like the whole frame starts twisting as well, and the background starts changing stuff. You're still just moving in one direction, but it sort of flips that concept on its head. And that looked really cool that they were able to do that. So I've never played a Castlevania game before. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and they tend to be, the hosts of those shows tend to be older than I am, maybe 10 years older or whatever. And a lot of people have reverence for particularly Symphony of the Night, I believe it's called, Castlevania game. I think that was a PlayStation 1. The big, I don't want to say gimmick, but like the big conceit of that game is that after you get like, you think you beat the game, but you're really at the half point mark, then you have to go backwards through the castle, but like upside down. Apparently, that's the big like twist of the game. So this game, it does have some of the upside down stuff. It's got a lot of like, throwbacks to the classic games, which I'm sure most of them were lost on me, but it's got a lot of, to make people nostalgic for the game. You know what I'm saying? And also recently, like in the past year or two, the Castlevania anime on Netflix, apparently, a lot of people liked it. So I checked it out, and there's 4 seasons. I got through the first season, and this was a while ago at this point, and I was like impressed. I was like, oh wow, I couldn't imagine it having a storyline or not being totally absurd. And I was impressed, like, hey, it's more than I ever would have thought. But it did, by the second season, it became the show that when I would put it on, I would be fucking snoring like 5 minutes later, dude. Some shows have that effect on me. But Castlevania, because I laughed at the idea that it had a story at all. And in Bloodstained, there's a story, there's characters talking to each other sometimes, and it's not really a story, man. It sucks, dude. There's nothing going on, really. There's demons we're let into the world, and then they're in a castle for some reason, and you gotta stop them, and you get betrayed by somebody. I don't know, dude. It's like just a MacGuffin, basically. The bare minimum that you need for there to be a story, just so you have some idea of what you're doing or why you're doing it. It wasn't very good, to be honest, or memorable, or anything. and it was just the character on this side of the screen talking to the character on this side of the screen. You know what I mean? They, there was like a cutscene once or twice that was just in-game graphics. It was just basically the camera would just zoom in a little bit. The production was pretty low, but I think they spent their whole budget, and this might have even been a crowdfund game or something like that. I don't really remember. I'll look into that. But they definitely saved the whole budget for the design of the game and the castle. It's kind of like a maze, you know. There's subterranean level, and fucking you can go all the way up in the roof and everything like that, and it's pretty cool, man. So what happened was, I got like 5 or 6 hours into the game or whatever, and just sort of stopped. You know, sometimes it's hard to tell when you fall off a game or fall off a show or whatever. Sometimes it's hard for me to tell, at least, where I'm like, did life just happen? And, you know, I sort of got distracted. You know what I mean? And my friend CJ was like, he's like, no, like, if it was good enough, you wouldn't have got distracted. But I don't know, because sometimes, like, if enough time goes by, I sort of need to, like, restart something. Like, momentum is a big thing for me. You know what I mean? So, like, when I just, like, fall off something, it's so much more of, like, a dopamine rush to be like, all right, well, let's do something new. Let's do something new. You know what I mean? And that doesn't mean, like, I didn't like that. It's just it's a whole thing, doing something new. It's like serotonin. You know what I mean? I don't know. Even, like, Final Fantasy VII Remake, I fell off that because life happened or whatever. That's one of my favorite games ever. You know, I got this fucking Barrett toy back here, and I put his leg back, his leg's back on, everybody. I know I left you hanging there. His leg is back on. All right, just don't worry about Barrett. But that's one of my favorite games ever. And, you know, I just fell off the momentum for some reason. Even Rebirth. I mean, Rebirth had a better reason for me to fall off because there's a lot of side content bullshit. I was really enjoying it, though. So I'm probably going to be getting back into that real soon. But it's a little tangent. So I fell off this game, and I'm glad I went back, because part of me was like, especially because it's inconvenient, because I had to keep my Game Pass membership up, and I was like, I should just fucking cancel Game Pass. And I almost just let this game go. And I'm glad I went back to it, because it was satisfying. There's something, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't necessarily play these old school games, but I can see how it's not just like, oh, there's no need for them anymore because we can do so much more technologically. It's like, no, they were doing something cool. They really were something satisfying. And I kind of want to, I don't really like this vibe and aesthetic as much. I think I would be more of a fan of the Metroid games. So I want to check that out. But, you know, the Castlevania, Metroidvania, it's basically the same thing. Where you're just exploring all over this huge map, and you'll hit, like, roadblocks that you can't pass until you get some ability or a piece of equipment or something. You come back later, and you just keep exploring, and there's boss fights, and just stuff like that. And it was kind of hardcore, to be honest. Yeah, this game came out only a couple years ago, I think. And the checkpoints are kind of far apart. You got to find a save room, or at least find a teleporter room so you can go back to, like, the little village and save there. And there was times when I was in a new section and I was, oh my god, like, where the fuck is the save room? And, like, not wanting to die because there's not a checkpoint. You got to start over. And it's such a two-sided sword, because that's annoying. You're like, oh fuck, I fucking died. You know what I mean? Or just, like, not wanting to die. And there was times, because your health regenerates, like, I had an ability that makes your health regenerate. And so I was in a bad spot with no potions left or whatever. So I zoned into this new screen where there's no enemies. And I just sat the Steam Deck down for like a half hour, ticked my health back up, because I didn't want to die. You know what I mean? It was hardcore that way. So, like I said, I probably would have added checkpoints or whatever, but I kind of respect it. Especially because its heritage is, you know, how it used to be, the hardcore way, you know what I'm saying? So I respected it. The boss fights, there was a difficulty setting. I kept it on normal because I was new to the genre and everything like that. But the boss fights were pretty difficult. I pretty much cheesed them. I made sure at all times I had max potions, which isn't that many. It's only like, you know, like 8 regular potions and 5 extra health potions or whatever the fuck they're called. You know what I mean? So it's not like you could just spam them. But I would make sure every time I got to a boss room, Well, first of all, you go in the boss room and it's immediately a cutscene. You can't like back out, which would suck. If you miss the save room, usually the save room is right across from the boss room, and there's normally there'll be like a visual thing, like a bookcase or whatever, and that means that's the save room. I never encountered this problem, but I could see it easily happening. It's where you accidentally zone into the boss room and the boss just kills you because you don't know the mechanics and you weren't ready for it. And you got to go back through the fucking section to get there again. And you realize there was a save room right across, and you just didn't check it the first time. That would have pissed me off, but that didn't happen to me. So inevitably, the boss would kick my ass the first time, and then I would be like, before I even tried it the second time, I would go back to town, like grind money, and just max out on my potions. You know what I mean? So I don't know if that was cheap or whatever, but I thought it was fun, you know, and they were just hard enough to make me feel like I had to do that. You know what I mean? And especially towards the end, I was on Google like, all right, how do I fucking beat this fucking thing? And really what it came down to was I wasn't crafting items, you know what I mean? So I could have crafted an even stronger potion, and once you craft it, then the shop will start selling it. So I wasn't really interacting with the crafting menu. That's kind of a cool little twist, because normally I just ignore crafting or whatever, but it's like crafting unlocks things that you can buy in the store, so it's actually important. So I got a little piece of advice from Reddit about the actual mechanics of the fight itself, but really I like crafted new armor and a bunch of food and stuff like that, and tried the fight again, the last boss fight, and I beat it on my second try. But it was satisfying. You know what I mean? I wouldn't really want it to be a lot harder. Some of the fights were harder than others. You know, a lot of projectiles all over the screen. You're trying to dodge and shit and everything. But some moves were overpowered, man. There's this move where I can just like hold up a shield, and I assumed that meant I couldn't attack. So I was just like defense, offense, defense, offense. But you can just swing your sword while you're totally guarded by this shield. And yeah, it drains your mana gradually, but I would just pop potions and just and I would just go up to a boss and just, you know what I mean? And just, some of the bosses are designed to jump all over the screen, but some of the bosses will just stand there and eat it, you know what I mean? So I probably cheesy, and I don't feel great about it, guys. I don't feel great about it, but hey, let me do it, you know what I mean? If you don't like it, stop me, you know what I'm saying? So I don't know. Listen, it was satisfying. I actually just beat it this morning. You know what I mean? It's a satisfying game. I'm glad I went back to it, because I had just come off the heels of fucking Persona 3, and I didn't like it, and I stuck through it for 80 hours. You know what I mean? And so I didn't know what to take away from that. I didn't like it, but I felt like I ought to beat it, and you know what I mean? And I don't know what to take away from that. And that almost could have led me to dropping Castlevania. You know what I mean? Or whatever it's called, fucking Bloodstain. And I'm glad that I didn't, so I don't know what the takeaway is. I guess I'm just crazy. I guess I'm just nuts. So, in progress now, we got Elden Ring, which I was playing as a solo game for like 70 hours, and then my best friend finally got a PlayStation 5, so he started re-rolling his character, and my other friend had played 6 months previous or whatever. And so we all started playing together. So that was like my main game. I was really mainlining that solo for a while. Whereas now I'm just playing it a couple times a week with the boys. So I wanted to wrap up Castlevania, and now I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to play next. Probably Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, while I'm gradually working my way through Elden Ring. Okay, yeah, I have a couple other ones in here. I always have multiple things in progress, like watching shows or reading books or whatever. I always have like a stack of half-read books with a bookmark in it, and I've always been that way. So I have a couple games. I'm not gonna tell you all of them, you know, leave something to the imagination. But Elden Ring and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, definitely among them. You know, I was wondering, like, I like doing videos, but I have to beat games to keep doing reviews and stuff like that. So I was wondering if I should do other content. Like, I did do the Summer Games Fest commentary and shit like that, so maybe stuff like that. I think I had the desire to make more videos, but I'm already beating games as fast as I can, so I might have to think about what sort of content I might want to do. Like, yeah, I want to do streaming. It's a goal for me on the channel to not just use like trailer footage of the games. It's to get like my own footage going with the streaming and everything like that. I don't think I'll do like let's plays, but at least to reference my own footage and stuff like that. So the problem is I have a Steam Deck. I might need to get a real PC. I don't know. But just thinking about what sort of content I might want to do that's more like regular than just beating games. But anyway, that's my little update. Thanks for checking it out. Peace.